Hey, my name's Tyler. Welcome back to the channel, I guess. And with today's version of the Walt Whitman series, we're going to be talking about the differences between character versus persona. This is a little less focused on Whitman himself, but this is more like a preemptive video to my argument that's going to be happening later. Today's example that we're going to use to kind of just like really dive deep into character versus persona is the show Breaking Bad. We're going to use one of the characters and kind of analyze from there. And yeah, you might be wondering why Breaking Bad? That seems like it has no relevance. And you're not completely wrong. You're not completely wrong. It is definitely a different show that deals with different topics to a certain extent, but Leaves of Grass is mentioned, and Walt Whitman is mentioned heavily throughout the text. And we wanted to use that kind of experience and make a little link and try to make it more fun. First off, we have Walter White. As you can see on the screen, I will not use copyright images. So there you go. There's my cosplay, if you will. Here's Walter White, and he is the person who works around with society. He has a wife, he has a kid, he's working around in society, like he has to be seen as a social person, right? This is his character. And Heisenberg, again, my filter, my face. Heisenberg is the person he wants to identify with when he does his criminal actions, let's just say, because he doesn't really want to be associated with the character, and just kind of like that. It's just it's his own role. Again, side by side, just to give you reference, like which one's which. And so with the character, again, this is Walter White. The OED defines character as the sum of the moral and mental qualities which distinguish an individual or a people, viewed as a homogeneous whole, a person's or group's individuality deriving from environment, culture, experience, etc., mental or moral constitution, personality. Now, I could have used the word personality to distinguish between persona and personality, but like that's needlessly confusing. But with character, we kind of get the idea of like this is someone's true self coming out. This is the way that like I would describe myself. Like if I'm a kind character, rings true to my soul, rings true to like all of these different things. And with persona, again, we have Heisenberg, modeled by someone famous, I guess. But the OED defines persona as an assumed character or role, especially one adopted by an author in his or her writing, or by a performer. So again, Heisenberg uses a persona to make all these criminal actions and everything. Assumed character or role, because like it's not like completely himself, but it's just like something he wants to fall under, if that makes sense. Personas are usually very exaggerated. Again, a role, and the highlight of the word, like the word assumed, is pretty huge, as an assumed implies like it's not like within your brain and everything, where Heisenberg might need to like, you know, man up or use this masculinity to get his own way in the show for like crime details. Again, not spoilery. Welcome back. New outfit, new day. But we're going to be talking a little bit more about I Sit and Look Out, including the terms that we just learned. So here's the manuscript on screen. You can pause and read it if you'd like. And here's the finalized version. Now, the finalized version does say that the title is Leaves of Grass 17, but later editions call the poem I Sit and Look Out, and I will be using the later editions just for clarity's sake so it's not as confusing. Our main argument here is that I Sit and Look Out shows Whitman's persona and character truly contrasting. The audience gets to understand the art behind the artist along with his anger behind the poem. So some huge Whitman persona signifiers are the self-regulation. Now, a Whitman scholar has kind of described this aspect of his self-regulation in his persona as a prominent philosophy attached to Whitman, describing how analysis of self-realization, that is, understanding your limits and your privileges, allows for societal and self-growth, improving kind of everything around you. Also, we see an otherworldly presence within the poem, which is, again, huge part of his persona. In the first line, I sit and look out upon all the sorrows of the world. Again, viewing. It is viewing something else. And we also see it with the anaphora of the lines within the poem of I see and I observe. Again, it's not like a conversation with someone else. It's looking out at the world at large. Again, kind of godlike in its own way. Now, with his character, we can see this a little bit more in the manuscript. So, that sorrows of my world phrase that we kind of just talked about, originally it was written as sorrows of my race, which I think is interesting because it kind of emphasizes that he's a part of the human race within this poem and like what's going on with his oppression and everything. It also could just mean skin color. It could mean like whiteness as he, identifies as that in this time. Whitman himself identifies as that in this time. And also we get to kind of see some of the anger and passion within the manuscript as hungered and stabs of something are very active and aren't really passive descriptions. Hungered is much put onto someone. Like, hungered is because you don't have enough food, which in its own can kind of create a story or like a situation that anyone can imagine compared to just like a slim person. Stabs, it's a lot deeper than just like a reflection. Stabs is very like active in motion. Like it's a very, I don't want to say like a knee-jerk reaction, but it is like kind of, it's quick. It's very descriptive in that way. And while these parts are removed in the final version, hungered and stabs are changed in the final version, it does still say something about the character of Whitman in the earlier stages before it's like really polished. Again, true to his honest self. Now, the persona is intact with this poem, as you can see later editions really emphasizing this more and taking out this character, as we talked about before. You really see this with the pencil edits. Now, I want to note the pencil edits because if you're using a different utensil, that's usually implies like a passage of time. And also, as you can see on the screen, there are ink edits made in this document. So it's interesting that he used a pencil later. It's probably done at a later time since all the other edits are done in ink. And they are kind of more passive, like using meanness instead of horrors, or men and women, which is a lot more like politically correct than just men. Just kind of shows like this like editing or persona, like trying to diffuse this anger a little bit. Also, he's explicitly mentioned his views on persona later in his life, describing it as, I remember it with the old players. My custom was, in the old days, to listen sharply to the pronunciation accent of the actors, then to stand by that, to stick to it, absorb, adopt it. Again, he's really trying to use this persona in his works. I cannot stress that enough. And with this addition of persona and character creates the art of this poem. The anger still lingers. The character is still there, even though the persona is more defined. Again, as we discussed, anger is changed, and now it's turned into gaunt. Gaunt, for the record, usually means like slim, like a slim figure. But it is still like, it's still sad. It's still sad to see such a slim person like that when they're being like marginalized against. Again, it's still like an inkling of it is still there. Stabs turns into ranklings, which means annoyance. But again, it's kind of, annoyance is a human emotion in a way. Like it is, to be annoyed is a little, like it's a little human in nature. And the ending line of the poem, see, hear, and am silent, kind of undercuts this self-regulation philosophy that his persona does. Because if you sit here and am silent and you're kind of reflecting on all of these different people, all of these different perspectives, it kind of just shows the guilt in that, and kind of how that like this persona aspect is very flawed in its own way. And yeah. So some of the weaknesses are a lot of the texts, a lot of other texts with Whitman acknowledge the idea of like the mask slipping. So this isn't like a unique take of Whitman's poetry. In conclusion, you kind of understand a little bit more about Whitman as a person within this poem, as you can see the process of his poems being made, which admittedly is really interesting, but you can kind of acknowledge the person behind it and understand kind of where his viewpoints are coming from, and allow yourself to make better judgments about his work and his artwork. And that's what I really like about the poem, is it is really just this like coping mechanism in a way, as you're going through all these edits, and it kind of leads credence to his later works, where they're arguably more scatterbrained, as some might say, or they're more existential. And I think it's really interesting in that own way. With that being said, here's my works cited, and I hope you liked the video.